Okay, so we're going to jump into 2 Samuel chapter 1. So we finished the first book of Samuel, and well, really where the second one picks up is right where the first one ends. And if we look at 2 Samuel 1:1, it says, "Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag." So there's a lot to unpack there from First Samuel. First Samuel ends with the death of Saul and Jonathan. In fact, if we go up to 1 Samuel 31 in verse 3, we can read, and I think I've said this when we got to the end of 1 Samuel, there are three records in the Bible about Samuel's death. One is Saul's death, not Samuel, Saul's death. One is from man's perspective. One in Chronicles is from God's viewpoint, God's perspective. And the third one we're going to read tonight in 2 Samuel is a man lying about how Saul died, which is fascinating. The Bible actually recounts his words, but when we look at the other two records, his words are a lie. But the Bible recounts it honestly. It's honestly what he said. He just lied about it. But in 1 Samuel 31:3, it says, "And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers." So King Saul has been shot up full of arrows. Verse 4, "Then Saul said unto his armor bearer, Draw thy sword and thrust me through, therefore, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took his sword and fell upon it." This is the Oriental way of hanging, to impale yourself on your sword, that ritual suicide, where, they literally would, and we've used the phrase that he fell on his sword, where he took one for the team. He was the one who took the punishment. He fell on his sword. Saul did that. And that was how Judas killed himself. Judas would have used, if he didn't have a sword, he would have used a sharp stick, sharpened it, and then impaled himself on that. That was the Oriental method of hanging, not on a tree like where you hang by a noose, but rather to impale yourself on a stick or on a sword. Verse 5, "And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So Saul died, and his three sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men that same day together." So God had basically told him this. He went to the witch of Endor to try to call up Samuel to ask for counsel. Hey, God's not answering me. And that witch had a familiar spirit which impersonated Samuel. Well, we can read about that record why Saul died if you look at First Chronicles 10. So first,
where were we just?
We were just in First Samuel 31:3 through 6. We just read.
Okay, we went back. Okay,
we went back. We went up to the one before. So now we're going to look at the record from God's perspective why Saul died. If you go to First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, and we're going to go to First Chronicles 10.
I have a question.
First Chronicles. Hey, Donna, nice. So First Chronicles 10, and we're going to look at verse 13. "So Saul died for his transgression which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it, and inquired not of the Lord. Therefore he slew him and turned the kingdom unto David, the son of Jesse." That's God's perspective on how Saul died. We see Saul die physically by falling on his sword. We see Saul died spiritually because he didn't obey God. He went and took counsel of a witch. Never something cool. Christians shouldn't be using things like horoscopes or witchcraft or crystals or all that dream catchers, all that new age nonsense. We get our power and authority from the God and Father, our Lord Jesus Christ. The devil will want you to get your power and authority from any other source, because if it doesn't come from God, then ultimately, whether directly or indirectly, it comes from the devil. So we've seen two records. Let's read on Second Samuel now, and we'll get to the third record as we read on. But the first record shows Saul dying because he fell on his sword. He was already shot up with arrows, fell on his sword. His armor bearer fell on his sword. his sons had already been killed, so that all of them, or at least the sons that were with him, all died. And then it says in verse 1, now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites. We read about this in chapter 27 of 1 Samuel. He went out. He went out to fight against the Amalekites, who had came and taken his wife and his children and all his men's wives and children's. They pursued after them and slaughtered them and took back everything and then some. And they went and they abode 2 days in Ziklag. Ziklag was the city that the Philistine prince, or the Philistine king, one of the 5 princes of the Philistines, gave to David to dwell in. So he's in Ziklag. In verse 2, it came to pass on the 3rd day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent and earth upon his head. And it was when he came to David that he fell on the earth and did obeisance. So he's bowing down before David, but he shows up, his clothes are torn, and there's earth, there's dirt on his head. These are 2 things that an Eastern man would do. In fact, to show signs of mourning or signs of distress. Let's look at Joshua 7. Go back to Joshua. We read this record when we looked at Joshua, when Israel was defeated because of the accursed thing that somebody had brought into the camp. There was an idol. The guy coveted the gold and wanted to keep it, and he hid it in his tent. So they went out to fight against Ai, and they lost for the first time. They lost in battle because of idolatry. In fact, anytime Israel lost a battle in the Old Testament, you can trace it back to idolatry, where somebody was practicing idolatry, were not worshiping the true God. So after his men, 36, I think it was about 36,000 men were killed in this battle. Verse 6 of Joshua 7:6, it says, and Joshua rent his clothes, tore his clothes, and fell to the earth upon his face before the ark of the Lord until eventime, and the elders of Israel, and put dust upon their heads. So this was a common thing to show that, hey, I'm in distress. Today, what somebody might do is they might wear black clothing, or maybe a wife might put a black veil over her face if she's mourning the loss of her husband. These were things we would do maybe in our culture. There, they literally would tear their clothes. And, you can go back to 2 Samuel. It's not like they had a bunch of change of clothes. Unless you were the king or the prince, a change of raiment was something rich people had. Most people didn't have it. So to tear your clothes was kind of a big deal, but it showed grief, it showed remorse, it showed mourning, and dirt in your hair. They would throw dust up into the air. It says something very similar in Job 2:12. You can look at that another time if you like. So this guy comes in, he's got his clothes rent, he's got dust in his hair, he falls and bows before David. Verse 3, and David said unto him, from whence comest thou? And he said unto him, out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, how went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered, that the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people are fallen and dead. And Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also. So he brings word to David that, yes, we lost the battle, and Saul and Jonathan are both dead. Now, Saul was David's enemy, but I don't believe David was Saul's enemy. David had multiple chances to kill Saul and never did. But Saul tried to kill David many times, and Jonathan loved Saul. Jonathan and Saul, they were on the same page. There was a love for each other there, a real bond between men, like men who had fought in battle together. These guys loved each other. So verse 5, and David said unto the young man that told him, how knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son are dead? And the young man that told him said, as I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me and called unto me, and I answered, here am I. And he said unto him, who art thou? And I answered, I am an Amalekite. It's interesting. This guy's part of the nation that David just slew. But here he is saying that he came upon Saul, right, at this battle, verse 8. And he said unto me, Who art thou? And I answered, I am an Amalekite. Verse 9. He said unto me again, stand, I pray thee, upon me and slay me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. And I stood upon him and slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he was fallen. And I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was on his arm, and I brought them hither unto my Lord. This isn't what happened at all. We read in First Samuel, Saul killed himself. This guy saying, "Oh, I killed Saul because he couldn't have lived anyway. So I just, I put him out of his misery." And by the way, I brought the crown and I brought his bracelet to you to honor you as king. Verse 11. Then David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and likewise the men that were with him, and they mourned and wept and fasted until evening. Same thing. David is mourning the loss of Saul. Now, I think we could learn a lot from David, because David never treated Saul as his enemy. There's a wonderful little book, if you ever come across it, called The Tale of Three Kings. It talks about Saul, David, and Absalom, David's son. How David was not treated well by Saul. David was also not treated well by Absalom, his son. And yet David never got bitter, never tried to, lash out against them. Sometimes we feel very justified if we don't get treated well by someone. And God says it's a righteous thing for God to repay tribulation for those that trouble you. It doesn't say it's a righteous thing for me to repay tribulation, but that God will handle it. I am the Lord, I will repay, said the Lord. So David never did that. He never sought to harm Saul. He never sought to harm Absalom, his son, even when Absalom chased him off the throne. We'll read about that as we go on. But they mourned him. He mourned the loss of King Saul. He always considered Saul the Lord's anointed. Even after Saul had walked away from serving God, David felt it's not my place to take God's anointed, the man he anointed king, and to kill him or to drive him from the throne. If God doesn't want him on the throne, God will handle that. And God did. And the Philistines took care of it. But this guy lied about it, saying that he had killed him. So verse 12, and they mourned and wept and fasted until evening. That would be another thing you might do if you were mourning. You wouldn't eat. You might not drink, you might not eat. The renting of your clothes, the throwing dust into the air. These were things that an Eastern person would do. And he fasted in the evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. And David said unto the young man that told him, whence art thou? And he said, I am a son of a stranger, an Amalekite. And David said unto him, how is thou not afraid to stretch forth thy hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of his young men and said, go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth had testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. And David lamented with great lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. To lament, Lamentations is that mourning. Actually, there's a book in the Bible called Lamentations, the Lamentations of Jeremiah, where Jeremiah lamented over Israel walking away from God and knowing that they were going into captivity and they would not listen. So lamentation, to lament, is that mourning. And so we see that also in the book of Lamentations. Verse 18, and he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Joshua. Now, this isn't Joshua, I believe. This actually, my note is there's a book of the upright where it's mentioned in Joshua, this book of Joshua, Jasher, where they taught Israel to use the bow. I mean, the bow is a very powerful military weapon. Before there were, rifles and other things like that, the bow really changed history. The bow was something that could even take a man down with armor if it was used properly. Verse 19, the beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? David had a genuine love for Saul. Now remember, David served Saul in the army for many years. David was the head of the army. David was really led the army for Saul and worked with Jonathan in many of these cases. So he has a genuine sadness that Saul is dead. And he calls them the beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ascalon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Askelon and Gath were two of the 5 cities of the Philistines. Each of these cities had a lord or a king, a prince, if you will. And each of them had their own king or prince that ruled over their city. And together, the 5 of them would rule over the nation of the Philistines. And so David said, don't tell them that he was slain. We don't want them to rejoice. Not that they didn't know. The Philistines had taken Saul's body, and some men of Israel went and took it back and burned it and then buried the ashes. Verse 21, ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, and the shield of Saul as though it had not been anointed with oil. For the blood of the slain from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. These 2 men fought God's enemies and regularly beat them. Went out against them and beat them. And David's recalling this. David's really speaking well of the dead in this case. He didn't dwell on the negative side of it. He dwelt on when they walked with God. Verse 23, Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and their death they were not divided. Jonathan chose Saul, and he died with him. You could say that was a mistake. Yeah, maybe. But Jonathan died with his father. He was loyal to his father. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet. Scarlet would be what rich people would wear. Scarlet, purple. Those were things that you got to remember. In the Bible times, there were no synthetic dyes. Dyes came out of nature, either from minerals or from plants, and they had to be extracted. So that dark color, that red, that purple, that scarlet, would typically reserve for royalty. So he's saying that Saul, you daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet, who basically made you wealthy. And others delights, who put an ornament of gold upon your paddle, that you were well off. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? O Jonathan, thou was slain in the high place. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant thou hast been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? David and Jonathan loved each other. There was nothing sexual about this. People who try to say that are warped because they think love means sex. And that's how the world treats it. We live in a society that really doesn't understand what love is, especially here, these love of 2 men who fought together, who worked together, who really cared for each other. You see it in men who fight in battle together, where they were willing to give their lives for each other, where there is this deep brotherly love, beyond brotherly love, where they just would lay down their lives one for another. We see that in certain military units, where one person will take a bullet or even dive on a grenade to protect the rest of the men. Those are things. That's the kind of love that Jonathan and David had for each other. Not a homosexual love. Anybody who says that doesn't know the Bible, and they say that, they look at this, oh yeah, that they were homosexual. It never says that. It never even hints at that. But people who are twisted in their understanding of what the word love means, they'll say that. But that's clearly someone who doesn't have a greater context of the Bible. Chapter 2, verse 1 says, and it came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, go up. Remember, David had a priest with him, and the priest had the ephod that he could ask of God questions, and the priest would answer for God. So David inquired, and he said, yeah, go up. And then he said, whither shall I go up? And he said unto him, Hebron. Now, it's interesting, Hebron or Judah. Look at 1 Samuel 30, because David did something when he came back from the slaughter of the Amalekites that maybe would put him in a good spot here. So if we're looking at Hebron, we're looking at 1 Samuel 30 and in verse 26. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. And then if you go all the way down to verse 31, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were known or wont to haunt, the places he used to hang out, he sent of the spoil that he won. He could have kept it himself as the captain of that host, but he took it and he sent it to Judah to bless them. Now Saul's dead, and God's telling him to go up to Judah. And he, where should I go? Go to Hebron. It's one of the cities that David blessed, verse 2. So chapter 2, verse 2. So David went up thither with his two wives, also Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. Remember, he had two wives at this point. David's going to marry more as time goes on, as he becomes king, but right now he has two wives. And the men of Judah came, verse 3. And his men that were with him did David bring up, and every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. So they were living in Ziklag, in the Philistine city of Ziklag. They left Ziklag and they came up, and now they're dwelling in Hebron. Verse 4. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, the men of Jabesh-gilead were they that buried Saul. So these men went out, took the body off the wall of the Philistine city, burnt them, buried them. So he was happy about that. But here, David's anointed king over Judah, not Israel yet, but Judah. Typically, when we talk about Judah, we're talking about the two southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin will eventually be the kingdom of Judah. Israel is the 10 northern tribes, is what we say. So right now, he's the king of Judah. Now, God anointed him to be the king of Israel many years ago. He sent Samuel to anoint him. But just sometimes God will tell you something, like God told Abraham or Abram when he first spoke to him, Abram, I'm going to change your name to Abraham because you'll be the father of many nations. And it went on for years and years. I think he was 75 when he first received the promise and didn't end up having Isaac until he was about 100 years old. So sometimes God will say something well before it actually comes to pass. He'll speak about it as if it's already happened, because God's both here and at the time it's happening. So for him, it's a reality. For us, we live in linear time. Sometimes God tells us something, but it isn't yet a reality in our life. David here gets anointed king over Judah first, and we see that here. And then he said, and they told David, saying, the men of Jabesh-gilead were they that buried Saul. And David sent messages unto the men of Jabesh-gilead and said unto them, blessed are ye of the Lord, that ye have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you. And I also will requite you this kindness, because you have done this thing. Therefore now let your hands be strengthened, and be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah hath anointed me king over them. So he's telling them, hey, Judah has declared me to be their king. Verse 8, but Abner the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead, and over Asherite, and over Jezreel, and over Ephraim, and over Benjamin, and over all Israel. So at this point, even Benjamin is part of what Saul's son is ruling over. But Abner was the captain of Saul's host. Abner was also Saul's uncle. We can read about that in 1 Samuel 14:50, where Saul took his uncle and made him captain of the host. Abner was also the guy in 1 Samuel 17. After David slew Goliath, Saul said, whose kid is this? And Abner goes, my Lord, I know not. He goes, go fetch him, bring him back to me. So Abner brings David to Saul. So David had worked with Saul and Abner as well. Abner was someone known to David, but Abner is still not ready, because remember, Saul was his nephew. Abner was Saul's uncle. So he takes Saul's kid and makes him king over Israel, including Benjamin. Verse 10, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began the reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years, but the house of Judah followed David. So right now, one tribe, Judah, is following David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So for 7 years and 6 months, he's literally ruling over just one tribe, the tribe of Judah. Verse 12. And Abner, the son of Ner, the servant of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon, and Joab, the son of Zeruiah, the servant of David, went out and met together by the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. So these two men, Joab was the captain of the host for David, Abner was the captain of the host for Saul, and then for Saul's son. They meet at this pool, one on each side. Verse 14, and Abner said to Joab, let the young men now arise and play before us. And Joab said, let them arise. He's talking about fighting. Let the young men fight before us. These guys are like the generals of the army. So we're going to let these guys fight, the young men. Verse 15, and they arose and went over by number 12 of Benjamin that pertained to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And they caught everyone his fellow by the head and thrust his sword in his fellow's side, and they fell down together. Wherefore the place was called Helkath Azurim, which is in Gibeon, and that means field of strong men. So these 12 men of David killed the 12 men of Ishbosheth, the king of Israel. Verse 18, and there were three sons of Zerah there, Joab, Abishai, and Ashel. And Ashel was a light of foot as a wild roe, like a gazelle. This guy was very, I mean, if you ever seen a gazelle move, they're very graceful, they're very powerful. This guy moved like a gazelle, basically. That's what he reminded him of. And Ashel pursued after Abner, and in going, he turned not to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. This guy's chasing the head of the army of Israel, the captain of the host of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul. Then Abner looked behind him and said, art thou Ashel? Ashel? And he said, I am. And Abner said to him, turn thee aside to the right hand or to the left, and lay thee hold on one of the young men, and take thee his armor. You know, don't keep chasing me. But Ashel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again, Ashel, turn thee aside from following me. Wherefore should I smite thee to the ground? How then should I hold up my face to Joab, my brother? He's a relative of Joab. And he's like, I'm going to have to kill you, and I don't want to kill you. Verse 23, howbeit he refused to turn aside, wherefore Abner with the hinder end of the spear smote him under the fifth rib, that the spear came out behind him, and he fell down there and died in the same place. And it came to pass, as many as came to that place where Ashel fell down and died stood still. Joab also and Abishai pursued after Abner, and the sun went down when they were come to the hill of Ammah. There lieth before Giah by the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. And the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together after Abner, and became one troop, and stood at the top of the hill. And Abner called to Joab and said, shall the sword devour forever? You know, these guys are really brethren. They're all of Israel, and yet they're fighting each other. And Abner's like, is this going to go on forever? Knowest thou not that it will be bitterness in the latter end? How long shall it be then ere they bid the people return from following their brethren? Job says, as God liveth, unless thou had spoken, surely then in the morning the people had gone up, every one from following his brother. We would have came up and fought with you. So Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and pursued after Israel no more, neither fought anymore. So Joab calls it off, even after his kinsman was killed by Abner. Verse 29, Abner said, and Abner and his men walked all that night through the plain, passing over Jordan, and went through all Bithron, and came to Mahanaim. That's where the king of Israel is living, Ishbosheth. And Joab returned from following Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, there lacked of David's servant 19 men and Ashel. So he recognizes that Ashel is no longer with them, plus 19 others died. The servants of David had smitten of Benjamin and of Abner's men, so that 360 men died. David lost 20 guys. Israel, Ashbosheth lost 300 and what did it say? And 60 men. 3 is 60. So it was really a one-sided fight, a one-sided win here. And they took up Ashiel and buried him in the sepulchre of his father, which was in Bethlehem, and Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at break of day. Hebron is where David is. So Abner goes back to where the king of Israel is, Ishbosheth. Joab goes back to Hebron where David is. Chapter 3, verse 1. And there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. It was about 2 years this war fought. And the house, but David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. God said that was going to happen, that God was going to take the kingdom from Saul and give it to David. I think this prophecy was fairly well known, and yet they're trying to either slow it down or stop it. It's not going to happen. Verse 3. Verse 2. And unto David were born in Hebron, and his firstborn was Ammon of Ahinoam the Jezreelite. That was his first wife. And his second, Chileah of Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. So Chileah is also could be translated Daniel. In fact, in First Chronicles, I think it's in First Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. Yeah, First Chronicles 3:1. It's listed as firstborn from Abigail as Daniel. So it's different translation. And he always refers to her as Nabal's wife, because after Nabal died, David took her. Remember, Nabal was the very wicked son of Belial that spoke against David. And then Abigail was very wise and kind and loving. And she stopped David from coming in and slaying all of Nabal's people. And then she told her husband about it, and he just basically keeled over and died. So once he knew she wasn't married anymore, David came and took her to wife. The third, in the middle of verse 3, the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. So he has Absalom of a third wife, verse 4, and the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and the fifth, Shephatai, the son of Abital, and the sixth, Itrim, by Egad, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. So he has six kids, 6 male children here. And it came to pass while there was a war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner made himself strong for the house of Saul. Abner was a pretty badass guy. But remember, Abner was the guy David mocked after David walked into the camp, walked into the tent of Saul, took his cruse of water and his spear, and walked back across the other side of the hill. And then from the hill called out, Abner, why did you not protect your lord the king? And he comes out and Saul heard him and said, who is this, my son David? He goes, Abner, you were derelict in your duties. I've got his water and his spear here. I could have taken his life. Why didn't you protect your charge, the king? So he has mocked Abner in the past, but they were on opposite sides here. So Abner, very much strong for the house of Saul and quite a badass fighter, we see. Verse 7, and Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, wherefore hast thou gone in unto my father's concubine? So he calls Abner out on the carpet for having sex with his father's concubine. I don't know if he did or not, but he did call him out for it. So, whether he did or not. Verse 8, then was Abner very wroth for the words of Ishbosheth and said, am I a dog's head, which against Judah do show kindness this day unto the house of Saul thy father, to his brethren and to his friends, and have not delivered thee into the hand of David, that thou might charge me today with a fault concerning this woman? I'm the only thing keeping you from losing the war to David, and you're going to break my chops, is what he's basically saying to him. Verse 9, so do God to Abner, and even more, except as the Lord hath sworn to David, even so I do to him, to translate the kingdom from the house of Saul, to set up a throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan unto Beersheba. Dan was way up in the north, Beersheba was way down south. He's saying, we're going to set up the kingdom of Israel to David from north to south. Verse 11, he could not answer again Abner a word again, because he feared him. Abner was a badass, and the king, there was nobody there basically that was strong enough to take Abner on. Verse 12, and Abner sent messages to David on his behalf, saying, whose is the land? Saying also, make thy league with me, and behold, my hand shall be with thee to bring about all Israel unto thee. And he said, well, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, that is, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. Remember, Saul gave David Michal, his daughter. And then when he began to hate David, he took his daughter Michal and gave it to another man illegally. He wasn't, even the king wasn't supposed to do that. She belonged to David. So he said, if you want to come back, you want to come to my side, bring Michal, my wife. Verse 14. And David sent messages to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, deliver me my wife Michal, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Remember, they said, the king delights in you and wants to make you his son-in-law. He goes, is that a small thing to you? I'm of a poor house. There's no way I don't have a, I don't have a dowry to give him, like, a lot of money, gold or silver, for his daughter. He said, all you have to do is give him, I think he said, give him 10 foreskins of the Philistines. Now, they don't donate those foreskins. You got to take them off the dead body. So David took 100 and used that as his dowry. Those are Saul's enemies, and he delivered 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be the dowry for Michal, Saul's daughter, Michal. Verse 15, and Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, even from Philatiel, the son of Laish, and the husband went with her along, weeping behind her, to Bahurim, and then said Abner unto him, go return, and he returned. I think when Abner tells you get lost, you get lost. Abner was a badass. And Abner had communed with the elders of Israel, saying, he sought for David in times past to be king over you. So now Abner is now representing David to the elders of Israel. Now then do it, for the Lord hath spoken of David, saying, by thy hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel out of the hands of the Philistines and out of the hands of all their enemies. And Abner also spake in the ear of Benjamin, and Abner went to speak in the ear of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel and that seemed good to the whole house of Benjamin. And Abner came to David to Hebron, and 20 men with him, and David made Abner and the men that were with him a feast. So David's looking to make peace here. And Abner said unto David, I will arise and go, and will gather all Israel unto my lord the king, that they may make a league with thee, and that thou mayest reign over them, that thine heart and all that thine heart desireth. And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So David the king sends Abner away in peace. And before this, they were enemies. And remember, Abner killed one of Joab's relatives, and Joab's not here, who's the captain of David's host. Verse 23, when Joab and all his hosts was with him were come and told Joab, saying, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he hath sent him away, and he's gone in peace. And Joab came to the king and said, what hast thou done? Behold, Abner came unto thee. Why is it thou hast sent him away, and he is quite gone? Thou knowest Abner the son of Ner, that he came to deceive thee, and to know thy going out and thy coming in, and to know all that thou hast doest. He says, oh, he's only coming here to spy out, your strengths and how you're set up, and he's going to come back with an army. He was just here on a reconnaissance mission, which wasn't true. And when Joab was come out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, which brought him again from the well of Sirah, but David knew it not. So Joab is acting without the king's blessing or the king's permission. And when Abner was returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him quietly, and smote him there under the fifth rib, that he died for the blood of Ashel, his brother. So he kills him. And in Israel, there was the revenger of blood was a legitimate thing. If somebody had killed one of your relatives, murdered one of your relatives, you had the legal right to murder him. To kill him. It wouldn't be murder, because you were doing it for revenge. There were cities of refuge you could flee to, but where they were was not a city of refuge. So Joab kills Abner for killing his brother. Verse 28, and afterwards when David heard it, he said, I and my kingdom are guiltless before the Lord forever for the blood of Abner the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab and on all his father's house, and let there not fall from the house of Joab one that hath an issue, or that is a leper, or that leaneth on a staff, or that falleth on the sword, or that lacketh bread. He basically curses Joab for doing this. He puts a curse upon him and his house. And David said to Joab and to all the people that were with him, rend your clothes and gird you with sackcloth and mourn before Abner. And King David himself followed the bier. And the bier and they buried Abner in Hebron. And the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. And the king lamented over Abner and said, died Abner as a fool dieth, and the hands were not bound, nor his feet put into fetters. As a man falleth before wicked men, so falleth thou. And all the people wept again over him. And when all the people came to cause David to eat meat while it was yet day, David sware, saying, do so God to me and more also, if I taste bread or aught else till the sun goes down. This was that fasting that was common in the East. You would mourn, you would fast. Not eating was something you would do because you were mourning. He was mourning the death of Abner. And like I said, Abner was a pretty badass fighter, and he was looking to make peace with David, but Joab wouldn't forgive him for what he did, even though he tried multiple times to have Joab's brother turn aside. Don't keep chasing me. I'm going to have to kill you. But that didn't count, so Joab killed him. So David's not going to eat, verse 36, and all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them that whatsoever the king did pleased all the people. So they appreciated David living his life openly before all the people. Verse 37, for all the people and all Israel understood that day it was not of the king to slay Abner, the son of Ner. This is kind of going to be important when you try to reunite Israel, because if you're killing their captain of their host, all the guys who served him are like, well, what are we doing? Going to go make peace? He just killed the guy who led us. But now it's like, no, David didn't authorize that. Joab did that. Verse 38, and the king said unto his servants, know ye not that there is a prince and a great man fallen this day in Israel? And I am this day weak, though anointed king. And these men, the sons of Zerah, be too hard for me, and the Lord shall reward the doer of evil according to his wickedness. So, hey, Joab, your deeds were going to be rewarded by God, and not in a good way. Not in a good way. How are we doing on time? Yeah, we're okay. Verse 4. When Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands were feeble, and all Israel were troubled. This was their great captain, the great, valiant man that led the armies of Israel, is dead now. The king of Israel, Ishbosheth, has no champion, and it says he's feeling very weak and vulnerable. Verse 2, and Saul's son had two men that were captains of bands. The name of the one was Bana, and the name of the other was Rechab, the sons of Rimmon, a Berahite of the children of Benjamin. For Beroth was reckoned to Benjamin. This is where they were from. They were two brothers. So they were like lieutenants. They were captains of band. They weren't the captains of the hosts, but they were captains over, a band, a large group of men. Verse 4, and Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame of his feet. He was 5 years old when the tidings of Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it came to pass, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Remember him. He's going to come up again a little later on, and he's going to be one of the last living relatives of Saul, and David will show kindness. Remember, Saul said to David, hey, when you become king, Saul even knew, David, when you become king, don't cut off my house. Don't kill my last living relative. And David swore to him that he would not, that he would be kind to his house. Verse 5, and the sons of Rimmon, the Berahite, Rechab and Bana, went and came about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who lay on his bed at noon. And they came hither into the midst of the house, and I thought they would have fetched wheat, and they smote him under the fifth rib. I hear that a lot. We've heard that 3 times, that he killed him under the fifth rib. That must be the place. I think there's a specific spot they teach, like the special forces, on how to use a knife. I think that's the spot they teach you where to put the knife in, because you hear it a lot, under the fifth rib. So they come and they kill the king of Israel under the fifth rib. Rechab and Bana, his brother, escaped, and they came into the house. He lay on his bed in his bedchamber, and they smote him and slew him and beheaded him and took his head and got them away through the plain all night. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth unto David to Hebron, and said to the king, behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, thine enemy, which sought thy life, and the Lord hath avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and of his seed. And David answered, Rechab and Bana, his brother, the sons of Rimmon, the Berothite, and said unto him, As the Lord liveth, who hath redeemed my soul out of all adversity? When one told me, saying, Behold, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good tidings, I took a hold of him and slew him in Ziklag. Who thought that I would have given him a reward for his tidings? How much more when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed, shall I not therefore now require his blood of your hands and take you away from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they slew them and cut off their hands and their feet and hanged them over the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. David was a decent man. He didn't ask for any of this stuff to be done. He's looking to put Israel back together as one nation. To do that, there has to be mercy. There has to be forgiveness. You know, these were all one people who were in a civil war between Judah and Israel. And David, clearly, God had anointed David. We know that God had anointed David. Israel knew that God had anointed David. Judah was the first to recognize him as king. And for 7.5 years, David ruled in Judah and fought with Israel with Saul's son Ishbosheth. But David, I don't believe David considered Israel his enemy. His goal was always to see them reunited as God wanted it to be. So these are the first 4 chapters of David becoming king over Judah. And then we see we'll see in the next chapter that they will anoint David king over Israel, and David will be king of a united Israel. Israel and Judah will be one nation. Much later on, after David's son's rule, Israel splits into 2 nations again, and we'll see that in the books of Kings, where is Judah, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin break off into the kingdom of Judah, and all the 10 northern tribes break off to the kingdom of Israel. Israel's capital becomes Samaria. Judah's capital becomes Jerusalem, which I believe is in Benjamin. So those 2 cities become the respective capitals of the 2 tribes. Sometimes it's proper. God will do things like that. Israel when Israel went off into idolatry and Judah was still standing for God, God needed to split them into 2 so that he could have Judah still stand for him, Judah and Benjamin. But here, God wants them, God's will is for Israel to be one nation under a righteous king. Ultimately, Israel will be a great nation under Jesus Christ. When Jesus Christ comes back, he will rule the world from Israel. New Jerusalem will come down from heaven. This huge city that was built will be delivered to Israel, and Jesus Christ will rule the world from New Jerusalem. We will be a part of that. We will work with him in his kingdom when he comes back. But first, it'll be the rapture. We'll be taken out. 7 years of tribulation. Then Christ comes back with us, fights a pretty one-sided battle, wins, binds the adversary, binds the devil for 1,000 years. He gets released after that for a short period of time, and then ultimately finishes him off. But we're going to be a part of all that. That's all part of our hope. And when we see the kingdom of Israel, God promised David that he would raise up a king to sit on his throne. That was talking about Jesus Christ. And ultimately, he would come and he would sit on the throne of David and he would rule over Israel. So next week, we'll get into chapter 5. We'll see Israel anoints David king over Israel, and then we'll pick up from there. You guys can unmute if you want. Do you have any questions or comments or thoughts? It's pretty dramatic, some of the stuff that God writes in the books of Samuel. And I think to see people live for God in difficult times is a wonderful thing. It gives us, I always think of it like the color commentary. The New Testament there are less books in the New Testament, and that tells us specifically how to live. And we have the book of Acts and some other examples. But then we go back and look at the Old Testament of people who loved God and lived for God and how they lived. And we see their courage, like, Joshua going into the promised land, be strong and of good courage. Saul, when he stood for God. And then David, when he, obeyed God and stayed faithful, even when he was running for his life, God protected him. We see these great records of men and women like Abigail and Ruth, who served God. just great, great records in the Old Testament that show us how people who love God lived for God. They lived wholeheartedly for God. We can do that. We want to do that. We want to live that way. No shame. We don't hide that we're Christian. We don't, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. No, we are boldly Christians. We live for God. We love God, and we want to see great things happen for God and God's people on the earth. And even those people that maybe hate you right now, we don't see them as our enemies. We see them as David saw Israel, as people who just need to be reconciled. You've been given the ministry of reconciliation. I've been given the ministry of reconciliation. Every Christian has it. You have the right to reconcile people to God, to bring back. We pray you in Christ's stead. We pray you instead of Christ. If Christ were here, he'd be doing it, but he's seated at the right hand of the Father. So he sent me to reconcile you to God. That is part of our mission here as Christians. So, good stuff. All right, guys. Well, I'll close in prayer. Let me stop the tape.